Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. I'm Mahin and I'm here with my co-hosts, Mort and Sim. And today we are sitting here the day after the election day in dealing with Trumpocalypse 2016. And the world hasn't ended yet, surprisingly. And we're still freaking out, still trying to figure out what we're going to do about it. You know, is this a good thing or bad thing? And to help us digest the aftermath of Trumpocalypse, we've got a very special guest on. He's been on the show before, and a good friend of ours, Sheikh Joe Bradford, calling in from Houston. He was gracious enough to call in on some pretty short notice. So, Joe, first of all, Jazakallah khair for coming back on the show and talking to us about this very important and relevant issue.
My pleasure, man.
So, I mean, what was going through everyone's mind last night? You know, I was at a work dinner, and I wasn't really thinking about the election too much. Sim and I were talking on Monday, remember, and we were talking about, hey, it might be kind of funny if Trump wins, just to see what happens.
Yeah.
you know,
I even said, like, part of me kind of wants to see the Washington elite go crazy and the media, you know, running around like chickens without their heads, and just a little bit of that chaos is kind of something you always want to wonder, like, what it would be like just to see the establishment kind of freaking out, you know?
Yeah. And like, but I think we all figured that even he thought he couldn't win because a couple of weeks ago he was like, well, you know, it's going to be rigged and this and that. So he was already making excuses why he was going to lose.
Yeah.
And I'm at this work dinner, and I work in the steel industry. So a lot of my colleagues and vendors, they're pro-Trump folks. And I was and early on, it looked like he was in the lead. He was getting the states he was supposed to get. And I told one of my friends who was, you know, a pro-Trump guy, he's like, yeah, you looking good for your guy. And he was telling me, like, you know what, Hillary's going to be a disaster for this country. He's going to tear it apart. Trump will be good for you Muslims too. You just like, don't believe all the rhetoric, all that stuff. And this is a guy that I've been, you know, he's been a good colleague of mine for a few years now, older gentleman. But he was pretty, he's like, they're going to give it to Hillary. Don't worry about it. You know, it's not like Trump's not going to win. I go home and you see the momentum kind of carry on. And by the time I go to bed, people are like freaking out. And I'm like, oh, he's got this. And at this point, I'm like in troll mode too. I'm Snapchatting with like the Trump selfie, like the filter on Snapchat. Yeah. You know, not that really, you know.
Like trolling people?
Yeah, but I think by 11:30 p.m. last night, you pretty much had an idea that she's going to lose.
Yeah.
Well, I think I was watching it since 5 p.m. And I think the funniest thing was, to be honest, was the people who were following the election. They were like, oh, Hillary's doing great in these states. In Pennsylvania, she started off well. And then slowly 10:30, 11:30 come along. Their faces get long. And they're like, what is going on? No one knows what's happening.
Yeah, you even saw the rhetoric of, you know, I was flipping between CBS and CNN. And in the beginning, it was kind of like, you know, chuckle, you know, the votes are coming in. Let's see what's going to happen with Trump. And then, you know, by the time we got to 10:30, 11, they were kind of like, we really don't know what's going to happen. And this, you know, you could see the fear in there. And, you know, they're kind of recalibrating what to say and be a little bit more diplomatic with their terms, the terms that they're using. Because it then became a very real possibility that he was going to be president. You know, I was in Ann Arbor this past week, Ann Arbor, Dearborn, Detroit area,
right?
And I went up there to visit some family and visit some communities. And so while I was playing the radio, I just noticed that there were so many commercials for Hillary Clinton, and they were. And the commercials were all just, you know, banging against Trump's derogatory, racist, sexist, you know, discriminatory to the handicap, you know, statements. And they just kept playing over and over and over again. And then election night, you know, I thought to myself, wow, you know, she really must have been hitting the area hard. And then come to find out that she didn't campaign in the Rust Belt at all. You know, basically Wisconsin, she visited once, I think, right after the Democratic primary. You know, Michigan, she went to Dearborn really quickly. You know, I think they went to Amir's Arabic restaurant, which is a good restaurant, by the way.
Yeah.
And then they went to Toledo, and that's, brought out Jay-Z and Beyonce, and that's pretty much it. I mean, truth be told, there's really nobody to blame but themselves for not covering the map properly.
Exactly. And then this was like a series of failures that the Democratic Party kind of did since the primaries kind of ended. I think a lot of people are quick to point at one finger, and say hey, Trump's rise to success was his hatred for Muslims. And that's, at least from the Muslim community, you hear that narrative. But I think there were a lot of different failures. If you look at how they dealt with the Bernie supporters and whatnot, kind of villainizing them, and after he lost, they kind of made them look like a little bit like a bunch of Looney Tunes, I guess.
Yeah, well, actually, if you notice at the Democratic National Convention, we had Sarah Silverman, and she basically humiliated Bernie Sanders fans, and she said, grow up, as if they were acting like children because they were really passionate about Bernie Sanders. Yeah. I just think that there's tons of variables. And I think one thing that Joe mentioned was that Hillary didn't put in the work in the states that, like Michigan and Wisconsin. And I think the Democrats probably thought that, those are traditionally blue states and we're really going to win them. And they depended heavily on Wayne County in Michigan. And then in Milwaukee County in Wisconsin, they thought, we're going to get the votes that we need. And I think you were right. I don't think she visited Wisconsin at all after she won the primary. She didn't even visit that state at all. And I think those were one of the things where that really cost her the election. And the other thing I want to say is I think all the pollers and pollsters, I think they totally ignored what they call the leaners, people who were kind of ashamed to say they're going to vote for Trump, but they were just going to vote for him anyways. And I think they were not really racist people, but people who just were, regular blue collar, regular labor workers that were just not happy with what's going on. And I think they felt like Hillary wasn't going to represent them, and she never even made an effort to reach out to them.
Joe, why don't you address that, Joe? Because your Facebook post yesterday was kind of along those lines. The Muslim rhetoric against Trump supporters being all racist xenophobes.
Yeah. So, let's, as far as the votes go, let's be clear about something. 6.6 million Democrats did not come out to the polls. So it's not even the issue of the Republicans adding new voters to the rolls or flipping votes. It's just inactivity on the Democrats' part. He did have more people come out to vote for him than Romney did. But, I think when we're analyzing the reasons for this, and this is what Mahin is alluding to, is there's a tendency to kind of brush aside very complex issues by, just nailing it on one thing. And so, the very lazy, convenient ways say, oh, well, Trump's a racist and everybody that voted for him are racist. I have friends that are, our age that voted for Trump. And when you ask them, they'll say, no, his statements were horrible. I disagree with them, but I don't trust anybody else in the establishment. He's proven he knocked out 16 other candidates on the who were establishment candidates on the Republican side. And I think that he's going to bring jobs. True or not, I think it's very difficult that there's a lot of rhetoric that's going around that is kind of, painting the white American voter as individually racist and somehow, they in their own person hate, Muslims or hate African Americans or hate whoever. And I think that while systemic racism does explain a lot of the phenomenon of motivating voters to come out, I don't think that it's the go-to explanation for why any one individual is voting. And unless we make that distinction, we're actually going to, Muslims as a faith community, we're going to alienate a lot of people from a faith that they really, on principle, not on, say, politics or whatever, but they really don't have a problem with. It's that, anytime Islam comes into the public sphere, it's in this, there's revolutionary light, critical race theory light, or international politics. And people are tired of all of those things.
Joe, I will say as a Muslim, I would have voted for Trump for all the reasons except for if he didn't use those hateful language that he used against minorities, Muslims, Hispanics, and whatnot. It would have been a great way to protest against the establishment, and I think a lot of people would have understood that kind of a vote, but instead, I being someone who supported Bernie Sanders and then seeing, finding out that Hillary Clinton's and the Democratic Party kind of sabotage or was working to sabotage Bernie's campaign, you found out that this isn't as clear as it is. You really can't figure out who actually you would vote for as a protest vote.
Yeah. There's a couple things that come to mind here. Well, I think the point is that I think to a degree, there is a little bit of reverse racism, meaning that what I mean by that is there's a lot of white voters who are not racist, but they're painting them out to be racist, and so it's almost forcing them to have to, advocate their own rights. I mean, for example, there are things in the country that do affect white people, essentially, for let's say, for example, jobs, right? Affirmative action. There are some people who have like qualified positions and they're unable to get a job or even a scholarship or whatever it may be just because of their skin color. And I think that these kind of things kind of make them feel, as an outsider. And so they feel like, well, wait a minute, who's championing my rights right now?
Right.
We have rights for Asians, for Native Americans, for blacks, for Hispanics. Where are my rights going? And they feel like sometimes, I think some of them feel like, well, wait a minute, I shouldn't have to put everything on the back burner just because I'm white, and I think those kind of people felt, what, maybe I'm going to vote for Trump just because, I'm tired of this.
There were some political commentators who said, make America great again kind of meant make America white again.
Yeah.
It was kind of synonymous with that. But again, not every...
I don't think it's necessarily true. I think that there's some... Look, there are some people that may believe that, but I think for the general public, I don't think that's true. I don't think anyone really thinks they're going to make America white again, right?
Right.
But the other thing I just wanted to comment on is I don't think that people necessarily, even anti-Trump, most of them, I don't think they fear that Trump is going to radically change America himself. I think what they're fearing is in certain parts of the country, Trump's rhetoric may enable certain people who have been kind of in the shadows and now they find some type of legitimacy in what they're doing. And just to give an example, in North Carolina, someone tweeted out this morning that there were literally a KKK members walking across a bridge, like a protest, just as a protest
cheering
in the morning.
Oh, I thought, what are they cheering or?
Well, they were just making a show that, hey, look, we're here in the morning, white America won. I mean, but is that isolated? Yes. Is that all of them? No. But I think people were fearing those types of things that might be enabled if Trump was, elected.
So, there was a Snopes article about that issue that disproved that it was a KKK rally or anybody marching. And I just refer people to that. I put that on my Twitter feed today because I saw that thing in the morning. And it seems to be people marching with Gadsden flags and military flags and things like that. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the fact that affirmative action has affected people negatively in those areas, because the population of many of the areas that Trump won in, quite frankly, are majority white. And I think that, it's not the issue of affirmative action or even rights for any other person or people that have negatively affected them, but it's corporatist, it's used by corporations and government neglect that have affected those places negatively. It's easy for them, it's easy to scapegoat immigrants, it's easy to scapegoat people of color, but it's even more difficult to really take to what the real problems are, and that is the problem of, corporate abuse of the American people, as well as, government neglect. And so somebody comes who's from outside of the government is promising that they're going to take care of them. They're going to buy into that. And so, it's in that sense that, systemic racism, which is a norm in many places, right, is something that people say, you know what, it's been working so far, and we're not getting any better with all of this other stuff that we're seeing. So why don't we just do this? So, it's a combination of feeding off of people's fears, feeding off of their abject economic situations, and then their hope that this one person who, is not doing what everybody else is doing, he's supposedly not pushing a globalist agenda, but is, putting America first and looking for the American worker, the small businessman. These are all claims, of course, because anybody who's elected, we never know what they're going to turn out to be, right? But we're just trying to, analyze or understand what these people are going through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Joe, me for one, I don't think much is going to change in the country. But what I want to do right now is I guess I want to ask you, like, what do we do from here? Like, Muslims in America, like, what do we do from here? And like, what do we expect? Like, what are some of the things that we can, I guess, do from this point on?
And I just wanted to add on to that to our listeners. One of our goals in this podcast is showing you all the different people in our society, in American and British and English speaking society, and showing them different things, different avenues where they can contribute their skills and being able to be productive in their communities and by sharing ideas on this type of a platform. So we really encourage you to go back and listen to some of our older podcasts that we've had with other guests and in sharing some of these ideas, because I think it all kind of comes back full circle to this event that we need to get our heads out of the sand, as the old saying goes, with the ostrich buried its head in the sand during a sandstorm. A lot of us still haven't kind of woken up from that. So what are some ideas you can share with us, Joe?
So, I would say that the main thing that we need to do as Muslims is to remain true to our belief system and our faith, and speak to people through the lens of that faith and what that faith encourages. It encourages community service. It encourages charity. It encourages helping it encourages creating wealth and creating opportunity. And it encourages the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by all people equally, regardless of their background. And I think that, when we can get away from so many of the other isms that Muslims have been investing so heavily in and that have turned on them, after, for the Bush election, Muslims invested heavily in the Republican Party and conservatism, and they felt that they were bitten, and then now with the Obama administration, Muslims worldwide were treated worse than under the Bush administration. And so this investment in liberalism and the Democratic Party, has kind of brought this full scale. And then now you're coming up with Trump. And I think that unless we turn back to Allah and we realize that we're not a race, we're not an ethnicity, we're not, as Muslims, we are a faith community, and we operate as a faith community, instead of, racializing our identity and playing identity politics, then we are not going to gain as much traction in America, and we're not going to be able to elucidate to the American people the beauty of our faith. And so, what I would encourage is that each and every one of us, go about your life. Many people, don't live in fear. Live with precaution, obviously, because, bigotry is real and hate crimes are real. Know your rights, know when you should report something, have your resources. And then if you're passionate about, making change in the country, just don't direct that into online, online communication, but, join, support, donate to different organizations that are going to defend your legal rights, that are going to teach people about your faith. And you, first and foremost, have to be a representative of that faith.
To interrupt you right there, Joe, because I want to share something. I can't tell you how many Muslims I talk to who refuse to talk about their beliefs in the workplace, whereas everyone else is very comfortable talking about, what they believe in. When people, ask about certain things related to what they believe in, they become very uncomfortable. And this is something that needs to end. If this is not an alarm, I don't know what is, in terms of being able to communicate your beliefs to others and in a personal way.
In order to communicate your beliefs to others, you have to know what they are.
Exactly.
And when you speak to many Muslims, well, that's not what I heard, when I was 7 years old. Well, if the extent of your knowledge of Islam stopped at the time you were 7 years old, and then how are you going to explain anything to anyone? Yeah. So I think with Muslims, it has to, we have to get away from these very simplistic notions of what it means to be a Muslim, and to take our faith to heart, to learn it properly, and to be able to contextualize it to the world that we live in, without bending or trying to explain away those things that might be difficult. Now, the problem is that sometimes many topics come up that are difficult to talk about because of the details. But by learning, by investing a little bit of time and tact in covering those issues, it will normalize Islam. And I think that all of the attempts, the isms and the things that I mentioned before, were all these attempts to assimilate. And I think we have to be more focused on, indigenizing the Islamic identity in the United States. In the African American community, the Islamic identity is very indigenous. It's looked at as part and parcel of the African American, identity. It's something which is accepted. It's fast, it's even fastly becoming the same in the Latino community. But the problem with many other communities is that we, like you said, we're too apprehensive to talk about our faith. Yeah. And then when we do, we're defensive. And our faith doesn't become something that's lived. It becomes something that's just, we're on the defensive about.
And I think one of the new initiatives with the Yaqeen Institute that Umar Suleiman is kind of leading the charge with, I think these type of initiatives can help Muslims be better equipped in explaining their religion, some of the tougher questions, believing in a creator, why they believe in the Quran as the word of God, common questions that are raised in regular conversations that happen between people, So
I would just caution one thing, and that is it's very important to differentiate when speaking to others about your faith. It's very important to speak about fundamental issues of your faith, kind of what in Christianity would be called the catechism. These are the known beliefs of our faith or our church or whatever. Right. And then to engage in polemics. And I feel that Muslims many times are engaging in polemics. They're engaging in defense and argumentation about the faith, and not necessarily just saying, this is a simple belief. I remember, one time when I was, one of my mentors, he said, people always bring this thing up to me and they say, why do you Muslims, why are you guys so concerned about the moon for starting Ramadan? Why are you so concerned about the moon? And he said, my explanation to any in-depth fiqh issue, to any different disagreements, whatever, is to say, Islam is like a gigantic tree, and you're asking me about one leaf, and you don't even know where the roots start from. So let me tell you about the roots. And he just explains to them, belief in God and obedience to God.
Right.
Okay, cool. I mean, I can understand that. So, I guess my caution is don't get caught up in the hysteria of the moment. Obviously passions are high and fears are high, but I also think that, this is not the time to slink away and to do less. It's actually the time to do more. It's not the time to take off your hijab. It's the time to wear your hijab with pride. It's not the time to shave your beard. It's the time to, comb your beard and have it look good and stand tall as a Muslim, to pray in public, to speak in Arabic. And to let people know that we're here and they have to deal with it. It's, to me, it's time to organize and time to become proactive, to see the things that we want to see, as Muslims, help better our society, which is, the U.S. And unless we do that with autonomy, and we do that with some sense of gratitude to Allah for being Muslims, as well as certainty in our faith, then we're always going to be playing second fiddle to some other ism that really is not serving our community, nor will it protect it. In fact, many times it will simply just detract from our faith and take us farther from it.
And so stop fighting over the minutia in our communities. I don't know how it is in terms of where you're from, Joe, in Texas, but in the Chicagoland area, we have a lot of infighting over very small issues and trivial matters and fiqh and whatnot, and there's people at each other's throats about it. And this is one of those wake up calls that.
Well, look, this is what I'm getting from what he said and what I'm hearing around right now. Republicans, Democrats, all these groups are going to come and go. They're going to be hyped. They're going to be in one day and out the next day, right? And I think we're looking for consistency, meaning if we're going to be part of this, if we're living in this country, we're going to be American Muslims, we're going to be here, we just have to focus on our day to day. And that's being consistently Muslim in our workplace, in our schools, in our families, in our homes. And I think right now, a lot of times Muslims, whenever we, like you said, when it comes to election time, you have Muslims for Republicans, Muslims for Democrats, Muslims for Libertarians. And I think, to be honest, at the end of the day, what we see is that actually divides our community a lot more than it brings it together. And as small as we are as a community in this country, we can't afford that divisiveness. And so I think that we should rather focus on what we have in common and what we're trying to achieve collectively.
Right.
And that, I think, is what Joe's trying to say, is that we just have to focus on the constant things that we do daily and just build on that, build a foundation and make that part of our fabric.
Mort, I actually I'm glad you mentioned that, how there's Muslims for Democrats or Republicans, etc. If there are, really. I think now, since the Bush administration, it's been almost like taboo to be a Muslim for Bush or Muslim for Republican. Just disclaimer, I was a treasurer of my college Republican chapter in college before I was MSA president. On a side note. But for me,
I'm a registered Republican.
I've always identified personally with conservatism. And Reagan Republicanism, etc. That's always been my cup of tea. But I think
in terms of economics, just to clarify,
or even social policy.
Yeah,
if you think of the social conservatism that the Republican Party had.
No, but Mahin, I think for a general part though, I think Muslims in generally, this is the funny part, because religiously as a community, we're probably more morally in agreement with Republicans than Democrats, and we're probably more fiscally in agreement with the Democrats than Republicans, right? So a Muslim will a lot of times find himself in the middle of both of them.
Yeah,
right. It even depends on as a Democrat. I personally have always felt like I agree more with economic policy of the Republican Party too. But my point is that, and more alluded to, we live our lives, but I think people need to really prioritize activity when they're not working, or, when there's, figure out, we have our family lives, we have time for our families, but I guess my frustration, I alluded to this earlier in the show, how I trolled whoever follows me on Snapchat with a Trump filter on Snapchat. You know, I did not vote for Donald Trump. Okay, I want to put that out there.
Liar.
I did not vote for Donald Trump. Just so no one boycotts the Mad Mamalukes because of this show, or boycotts me or whatever.
Jail him.
But you know,
but I want to say that our Sheikh Amr, he called it. He was calling it for a year ago. He was saying Donald Trump is going to be the next president, and no matter what the polls were showing, he just stood by. He's like, he's going to win.
Well, but my point was that my frustration was this morning when I wake up and I see where people were crying and they're so upset. But I'm like, dude, you just guys can't participate every 4 years. Just show up to the federal election and vote, not have a clue who's in local elections, not have any. I mean, we've got to be strategic in the sense that whatever party you believe in, because like I don't think any party deserves a monopoly on who we are as Muslims. Figure out what you stand for personally, and then like get involved in whatever capacity you can.
That's a really important point, because if you notice, a lot of people when they go to the election poll and they voted this year, after beyond like the presidential candidate, they didn't know who to vote for. They didn't know nothing about anybody else. And I think if you're really going to be that politically charged about a candidate, then you might as well be involved in a grassroots organization and say, hey, you know what? I'm also going to work on a grassroots level. And because to be honest, if you're going to vote on the federal level, the local vote counts a lot more and affects you a lot more than the federal level, right? So, I mean, I'm just saying in that case, if you believe in voting and you believe it's right and whatever it may be, I mean, I know there's different opinions, but I'm just saying, if you're going to be true to that, then at least do it the right way, right? Meaning start with your local elections, start with what, you know, congressmen, whatever it may be, et cetera, et cetera. Don't just, hang your head, you know, up when it's the, you know, when it's the federal election and you're worried about the president. And I think that's the problem we Muslims have. You know, we wait to the last minute in this country to do something.
Exactly.
You know, we've always been doing that. We've been hiding in the community for a long time. We haven't outreached to our neighbors. We haven't outreached to our community. We haven't done any of these types of things. And then all of a sudden, when we're forced to, we all of a sudden become experts in everything, right? And we're like, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to be that. We're going to do that, right?
Right.
So I think that's the problem we're having. We're not organized anymore.
Yeah.
So just to add to that, we don't do all of those things. And then when we don't get what we want, we become jaded. Mm-hmm. And we think, you know, we deserve better. Why haven't we been given better? And I think that's just because we have to put in the groundwork. And we have to know those things. And it comes with political maturity. And in some communities, in some Muslim communities in the United States, they are very involved. And in others, not so much. Mm-hmm. And the community, when you talk to Jewish faith leaders and Catholic faith leaders, whose community dynamics are actually quite very similar to many of the Muslim communities, they say that the same thing has happened, and it's just a process that we have to go through. But I think that the one thing that I fear for the most with the Muslim community is that so many of our activism is unbridled, it's unmoored from our faith proposition. Mm-hmm. And it's so very much tied to an identity that is not necessarily just representative of who we are as a faith group. And that, to me, that's dangerous, because that is very alienating for many Muslims who, you know, may be making leaps and bounds Islamically, but many times might not be seen as authentically Muslim enough. And that's a problem. And I don't think it's, you know, and this is Sim, just to go back to what you were saying, I don't think it's an issue of arguing about minutia in our communities. Mm-hmm. We, you know, that's present in many other faith groups. It's present in many other communities between churches and people switching allegiances and so on. So I think it's a human condition. Right. I think the what we have to come to a realization is that there is a general Islamic identity in the United States that, if we're going to pin on ethnicity, is going to end up excluding many of us, and putting us in those situations where we have to explain who we are. But if we say that we have a very racially diverse, very ethnically diverse, a very politically diverse community, and when this is something, Mahin, that you were talking about, You're going to have Muslims that are Republicans. You're going to have Muslims that are Democrats. You're going to have Muslims that are in the Green Party. You're going to have Muslims that are independents and libertarians and so on and so forth. Myself, I'm generally registered independent, unless, of course, depending upon where I'm living, and sometimes you do have to register as a particular political party. But when we come to terms with the fact that we are that diverse, and at the same time, that diversity is a strength for us because we all want to protect our identity as being Muslims, as a faith group, then it becomes much easier for us to push forward legislation that respects not only our faith group, but the faith groups of others, and piggybacks off of many of the strides that they've made, especially in the Jewish community. But the more that we become entrenched with racializing our own identity, and I don't know if we said this on this show or on others, or we talked about this before, maybe in a personal conversation. Yeah. I'm not saying that people don't racialize the Muslim identity. They do. And that's the reason why many people in the Sikh community are hit the worst with anti-Muslim bigotry, because they're thought to be Muslims. But my point is that how we react to that. And if we react to that by saying, yes, we do accept that moniker of being a racialized identity, it becomes that much more difficult for us to have very, very important conversations about the principles that this country is founded on, and what we can add to it as Muslims, because we're not then speaking from a theological perspective. We're speaking from an experiential perspective. Notice how the Sikhs, whenever the Sikhs are challenged about why they don't just take off their turbans and basically fend for themselves and kind of throw the Muslims under the bus, their answer is, I've never heard a Sikh say that, well, yeah, that's a good idea because we've just got to, we as Sikhs are just, people hate us because we're brown. I always hear the Sikhs say that would be unbecoming of us in our Sikh faith because we see that we're looking for justice for all people. You see what I mean?
Exactly.
So there's a difference of perspective, and that takes a level of maturity in our community that can get past feeding into. Doesn't mean not supporting. I think that there are huge race issues in this country that must be solved, and they must be dealt with frankly. But I don't think that our voice as Muslims is a racial voice. But we can speak to justice, because justice will bring. If we speak about justice, it'll bring reconciliation for all sides. I'll give you this, and I'll stop. For example, we talk about the school-to-prison pipeline. School-to-prison pipeline is a huge problem in the United States, where kids are being cajoled or groomed from the time they're in elementary school to end up in a prison. And that's from policies that are implemented in elementary, middle, and high schools. That's from policing of high schools, and now high schools have their own police forces. Middle schools have their own police forces. They look like prisons, so on and so forth. Huge problem, indiscriminately affects with the incarcerated blacks and Latinos. No one can deny that.
Yeah.
The numbers are there. The studies are there. When we go when we as a Muslim community tackle this issue, if we tackle it from a racial lens solely, right? Now, I'm not saying that an African American Muslim or Latino Muslim shouldn't speak from their ethnic community's perspective about these issues, because I can't speak because I'm not part of that ethnic community, and I shouldn't. But I should magnify their voices when they're speaking about justice. But when someone comes and they speak in the name of Islam, and the vernacular that they use is that same racial vernacular, they're actually appropriating someone else's identity, somebody else's argument, and they're racializing their own. And what that means is that all of the other people who are also trapped in that system on the opposite side, meaning rural whites, who basically have no other form of employment except many of these private prisons, are not going to see the inherent injustice of the school to prison pipeline. They're going to see you want to do economic detriment to me and my community by shutting down our only source of income. So when we talk about justice, we have to realize that there are people that are equally being affected on the other side of the coin, and that we need to provide opportunities for them to be able to have economic freedom and slip out from underneath the same system that is holding down a very large part of the population. And when we can do that, then we'll have natural allies who will not want to benefit off of the misfortune of others, but will want to have fortune, their own, they want to benefit themselves and their own communities even more. But these are national conversations that have to be had, but it takes us reorienting our perspective as a Muslim, as a faith-based community in the United States, reorienting our perspectives to amplify voices of justice in other communities and to speak in a unique sense about what we believe as Muslims is our proposition for making America a better place for everyone.
Right. So what I can gather from that pretty much is essentially like we need to be part of the solution and not just kind of be part of a problem, because what you mentioned was a good example of by advocating for rights of a certain group of people, you might be taking away or harming the situation or furthering the situation of somebody else that's making it worse. And so while we may think we're doing something good, we're not providing a complete solution. And I think that's part of what Muslims need to do now is find a way to find solutions for our societal problems while maintaining our identity, but while not at the same time not just attaching it to a race, whether it's Arab or Indian or Black or Hispanic. And I think, to be honest, that's where we failed right now as a community in a lot of places, just like you said. And we've seen that even in our dawah and our outreach programs. Like, for example, there have been churches in this community that have been here for just as long as our masjid has been here for, and they've never once seen a Muslim around. And this is a very heavy populated Muslim area. And there have been guys who've been living here for 60, 70 years, old men that have never once met a Muslim. And to me, that's pretty shocking. I mean,
as we close this podcast off, I just want to reiterate that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gives us the most protection, not Trump or Hillary or anyone. And it is that faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will always be our protector. So maintaining that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be our utmost and highest priority at all times, no matter who's in power. Just being a parent myself of 4 kids, I think about all the different probabilities of ways my children could be in harm, and who's taking care of them, is that person responsible enough, and all the different ways that they could get into harm. And I realize that it's an infinite number of possibilities of them getting in harm's way, and it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is actually providing that protection over them while I'm not there. So and while I'm there, he's the one.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and I got this from a beautiful brother who posted a reminder today. Allah says, وَلَا تَرْكَنُوا إِلَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا فَتَمَسَّكُمُ النَّارُ وَمَا لَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ مِنْ أَوْلِيَاءَ ثُمَّ لَا تُنصَرُونَ. And do not seek refuge, do not rely upon those who are oppressive, lest the fire touch you. And then you will have no one other than Allah to take as a supporter, and then you will not be given victory.
Wow.
So, when we talk about ourselves as a group, we're talking about, returning to Allah, taking that as our MO, taking that as our basis for speaking and engaging others, and then because if we try all of these other things, they are not going to benefit us, and then in the end, we won't have the victory that we're seeking, and we won't have anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to turn back to.
Exactly.
Joe, we talked about a lot of things tonight. The last point I want to get your take on before we wrap up here. There are protests and maybe even riots going on in some parts of the country. What's your advice to those who are participating in that? Like me personally, I thought it's pretty distasteful. We've always been about peaceful transition of power. He won the election. Own it. Let's own it. Like, I don't want to, but there's a lot of Muslims participating in that as well. Like, do you have any advice for those who are, participating in that or thinking about participating in those situations?
My advice would be, the meanings that are summed up in that verse. And that would be that, that things which are oppressive, that attack the sensibilities, public sensibilities, and the sense of public safety and the general welfare of people should be avoided. And it is kind of strange that we were lambasting Trump for not explicitly saying that he was going to accept the results of the election, and then to go right around and then protest the fact that the election didn't go the way that we wanted. So I think that there are more productive ways of channeling that energy, whether that be, specific civil rights organizations within the Muslim community, general civil rights organizations in the United States that are protecting civil liberties. They're coming up with strategy that will be able to protect not only Muslims, but all those who would be adversely affected by some very frightening cabinet appointments. But we have to be, we have to think these things through and not give into emotion, but, to return to Allah, ask ourselves, what's going to be the most beneficial thing that I can do for my faith and the most beneficial thing that I can do for the people, because as the Prophet ﷺ said, that, the most beloved people to Allah are those that are most beneficial to the people. So are the actions that I'm doing beneficial or not?
Right, Joe. Hey, appreciate you again offering those words of wisdom to us tonight. I think it's really needed in our community. The reality is Donald J. Trump is our next president of the United States, at least for 4 years. And, and it may not, we don't know the future. And Sim alluded to, we rely on Allah as our protector. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. It could be that his presidency in some way, shape, or form could be more beneficial for us as a community than a presidency of Hillary Clinton. So, I've been pretty optimistic about that, even leading up to the election, that inshallah, whatever works out will be for the best. So Joe, again, jazakallah khair for coming on again. We really value your insight. For our listeners out there, if you have any questions or concerns, you can email us at themadmamluks@gmail.com. Also check out our website at www.themadmamluks.com. Follow us on Twitter, like our Facebook page, subscribe on iTunes and or Stitcher Radio, and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. For special guest Sheikh Joe Bradford, for my co-host Morton Sim, I'm Mahin signing off for the Mad Mamluks. Assalamu alaikum.
Drain the swamp, Trump 2016.